30th Annual Policy Conference held by the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee. The road to peace is the topic of a speech by Yitzhak Rabin, the Minister of Defense. Following that, we hear an address by Alan Dershowitz, a professor from Harvard University, who discusses Israel's image of America.
By now, I'm certain that none of us here on the dais have to introduce ourselves, but I'll say it in any case. My name is Rabbi Israel Miller, and I'm pleased to have the privilege of introducing for greetings and for a brief statement Mr. Seymour Reich, the chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. You haven't heard from him at this conference as yet, and so let me tell you who he is. He is the international president of B'nai B'rith, has served in that capacity since 1986, one of the youngest men ever elected to this position. He is a lawyer, Phi Beta Kappa graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, and his law degree is from Harvard University. And he's been active in these past years, particularly on behalf of Soviet Jewry, and in the course of his duties has met with major world leaders and certainly with the leaders of our country. He is our spokesman, the spokesman for the organized American Jewish community for 50 major American Jewish organizations. Yes, there are that number, AIPAC amongst them. He's been an articulate spokesman. He has spoken with dignity. He has spoken with forthrightness. He is not merely an able leader, but he has filled that position which has been held with the same forthrightness and dignity as the other members of the Conference of Presidents, as the other leaders of the Conference of Presidents have had in years past. And we're very pleased that he is going to speak on our behalf and to us this morning. Mr. Seymour Reich.
Thank you, Rabbi Israel Miller, Izzy, as we fondly call a mentor and stalwart of the American and world Jewish community. It is indeed my privilege to address you, to give you greetings and some brief thoughts at this very important moment in your convention. Regrettably, I have not had the privilege of sharing these last few days with you because just about a mile from here, our own B'nai B'rith has been having its own International Board of Governors meetings, and I've been flitting back and forth. And as many of you were on the Hill this morning, many of our members were there too, and our people from outside the United States were visiting their embassies. But AIPAC, clearly, is the most important and influential and significant Jewish organization in the United States that speaks on behalf of the American Jewish community on issues concerned to Israel and the Middle East. And when it speaks, its voice must be heard. AIPAC is a member of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. It's a mouthful. I never could get that title right until I achieved the chairmanship on January 1, and now I can state it. But it is one of the many 50 organizations that comprise this conference that attempt to bring some cohesion and some unity and sense of direction to the Jewish community. We're a big community, although we're small in numbers. We're not monolithic. We have many voices, and we have the courage from time to time to speak out in various directions, not only on issues concerning the state of Israel and peace in the Middle East, but issues of concern to the American community here in the United States. But I want you to know that the Conference of Presidents and the American Jewish community is as united today as it has never been before on behalf of the peace plan proposed and put forth so courageously by the State of Israel. There are 4 points to that plan, and we shouldn't only focus on elections. There's relationship with Egypt and the fulfillment of the Camp David Accords. There's relationships with the other Arab nations that still surround Israel in a state of hostility. There's a suggestion that monies be put forth to rebuild housing and give a sense of dignity to the refugees who are in those squalid camps, who've been kept there for years as pawns of the Arab countries. And there's also that peace plan, that election plan the State of Israel has suggested. The Prime Minister made that proposal. He was here in Washington just a few weeks ago, and some of us had some trepidation as to what he would occur when he came here. It was a new administration in the United States, and it was a new government in Israel. The government was formed on December 22nd, and this government came into effect on January 20. And these two important heads of state were going to come together for the first time. And they hit it off well, and the United States and President Bush reaffirmed that solidarity, that security, interest, and alliance that exists between the United States and Israel, and the cultural and democratic ideals that these two countries have, and that Israel has espoused for 41 years of its existence. And the Prime Minister came forward with a proposal, and the government of the United States indicated that it was supportive of the proposal in words that we weren't really sure as to what that meaning was, and maybe they were waiting for the Prime Minister to go back to Jerusalem and to get the support of his government, because it's a coalition, it's a unity government, and there are also many voices in Israel, as there are in any democracy, where peoples really have the right to speak out. So the Prime Minister put that plan, that 4-point plan, to the government of Israel, to the cabinet, and they supported it. It doesn't mean that there weren't differing views. It didn't mean that there weren't dissensions. But it did mean that Israel was prepared to take risks for peace. And it did mean that Israel was again saying to its Palestinian neighbors and to the Arab countries, here's an opportunity, and don't blow it as you have in the past. Don't lose that opportunity. And if the state of Israel and the government of Israel are to go forward, if they are to be encouraged, within the framework of their democracy, then they need the support and the encouragement and the direct statement by this government that it encourages and supports and will encourage others and will support that peace plan. There's no doubt that the United States continues to be that strong ally of the State of Israel, and nothing can shake that alliance. But there are times when words have a significance, and when sometimes people take those words out of context or highlight words out of their intended meaning. The government of the United States has said for years that it is against the annexation of territories. That is not a new statement of policy by the United States. We understand that. Countries can disagree, and we're not sure where countries stand on those positions. But when we take statements of that nature, and when we put it into a text which tries to create a balance, then there is an unintended effect, possibly, of creating tensions where tensions did not possibly exist. There's no question that the State of Israel wants to reopen those schools. My goodness, it believes in education. Those universities that it has established in the territories have given an ability to Palestinians to reach out and to talk and to stand up with dignity. But if schools are to be opened, and how easy it is to open schools, the defense minister can tell us that. There has to be a cessation of violence, and those schools cannot be used for that purpose. So the State of Israel has come forward with a positive plan, and we hope that the United States, and we know that the United States will give the proper signal and will reach out to the Arab countries that it has dialogue with and will say to them, this is your opportunity. If you want to know what any final status may be, this is a government that says that they want to talk now, that they're prepared to meet with representatives of the Palestinian peoples, and there's got to be a confidence-building measure, and the State of Israel has probably gone as far as it can go at the present time, and it needs the encouragement of allies in Washington and in the West, and those Western democracies should not misunderstand the dialogue that the United States has opened in Tunisia. The signals that they are sending to us are probably the wrong signals. Sure, Yasser Arafat can go to Élysée Palace and can use a French word which has ambiguity, but it's so easy for them, if they really want to, as the Secretary said yesterday, to revoke that covenant. So we're together. We're together with AIPAC, so strong, so vital, so vibrant, looking out, symbolizing the unity that we, together with the Conference of Major American Jewish Organizations, stand together to encourage this peace process, to encourage our government, to encourage the Israelis to find peace. And we are hopeful that our government will indeed take the opportunity and move forward with it forcefully, so that there are no mixed signals in this process. Thank you.
The State of Israel has been in existence for 41 years. And for 41 years, Yitzhak Rabin has been in the leadership of that country. Of few people can it be said he made a difference. Of Yitzhak Rabin, it can be said he continued year after year to make a difference. It began at the beginning of the state. It continues throughout a distinguished career until today, even today. The man responsible for bringing forth the peace plan, the election. The heavy responsibilities are his, and we are delighted and honored to welcome him here to our forum to speak on the prospect of peace. Ladies and gentlemen, the Minister of Defense of the State of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin.
Nice to start.
Mr. Chairman, my colleague to the head table, friends of Israel, allow me first to express the deep appreciation that I believe most of the people of Israel owe you. Your activities are well known all over Israel And I believe that the name AIPAC is known by so many Israelis that you yourself would not believe. You have stood beside Israel as American, trying to assist Israel on what is agreed on a wide and national basis in Israel. No doubt that without your activities, Israel would not have achieved the kind of support to its security, to its political freedom of maneuverability, the way that we have today. And for that, thank you. Thank you very much. Exactly today, on the 23rd of May, 22 years ago, President Nasser decided to close the Strait of Tiran to prevent freedom of shipping between Israel through the Red Sea outside the world. This act of war brought about 2 weeks later the outbreak of the Six-Day War. The results of that war are known, and I don't have to elaborate about them. On one hand, unfortunately, after additional 2 wars, the War of Attrition and the Yom Kippur War, a courageous leader of an Arab country decided to put an end to the use of force as the main means of solving his problem with Israel, and to embark on peaceful means by which to serve the interests, the real one, of his own people, the Egyptian people. 1947, the disengagement agreement was signed between Egypt and Israel. First agreement for after 25 years, without any agreement between an Arab country and Israel after the armistice agreement of 49. In 75, another agreement, the interim agreement. 3 years later, 78, the Camp David Accord. 79, the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. 2 months ago, we celebrated in Israel the 10th anniversary of the peace treaty, the signing of the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. On one hand, it proves that whenever there is a real desire on the part of an Arab country leader, and he shows it in a clear, sincere way, peace is not a dream. Peace can be achieved. Peace is attainable. On the other hand, what was the reaction of the Arab world to the Egyptian move? Boycott, banning of Egypt, ousting of Egypt of all the inter-Arab organizations. And strangely enough, today, at Casablanca, when the Arab leaders will convene for their summit meeting, Egypt was invited without demanding from Egypt to ignore any of its commitments under the peace process. Again, shows that when an Arab country, an Arab leader, is determined, he can overcome even the difficulties within the Arab world. I said so because while realizing the threats of war that still exist, when many Arab countries, especially the more radical Arab countries like Iraq, Syria, Libya, are continuing to arm themselves in unlimited quantities of sophisticated conventional weapons that they get from the Soviet Union, entering into new dimensions of arms like ground-to-ground missiles, chemical warfare means. Let's not forget that peace has been achieved. And it's our aspiration, it's our desire, is to do what can be done to expand the peace process beyond the peace between Egypt and Israel. I believe that the cabinet decision last week was the move in the right direction to show what Israel means to be a Jew, to be an Israeli, to my humble opinion, is to seek, to try, to do almost everything which is not endangering Israel's security towards peace. And allow me, therefore, to try to explain what is the peace initiative. It was mentioned that it includes 4 points. All of them are important. But the key, the main key to move ahead lies in the 4th point. How to move from the present situation of violence, confrontation, to negotiation by which to achieve peace on our eastern border with Jordan and to solve the Palestinian problem. This is the key for the simple reason. With Egypt, we have peace. But Egypt, since 1982 or 83, has decided not to continue to lead in the peace process. Jordan, that we hope, many of us still believe that Jordan will find opportunity to join with the peace process. But Jordan in July 88 made it clear that Jordan will not lead or take upon itself the lead in negotiations with Israel. Syria, unfortunately, maintained the most hostile policy towards Israel. I wish that there will be a change of policy on the part of Syria, and they'll be ready to sit around the negotiation table without precondition, with the purpose to achieve peace between our two countries. But there are no signs of it by its leadership, acts and words. Lebanon, still in tragedy. They can't talk among themselves, and therefore Jordan is not the partner with which to start the peace process. Therefore, if we mean business, if we would like to see a beginning of movement in the peace process, the partner at the present should be the Palestinians. There is no another partner at the present to whom we can direct a practical initiative for peace. Unless we'll start with them, it is difficult to see any meaningful move towards peace. When we say Palestinians, one can say that there are two options. The Palestinians that reside in the territories, the 1.5 million, the largest sub-entity of Palestinians. Others might say the PLO. Allow me to explain why the Israeli government position is very clear that with the PLO, Israel will not negotiate. I know and I have heard that some people here believe that Mr. Arafat made certain verbal modifications to certain sentences in one paper or another. But let's look to the real issue. In the speeches of Mr. Arafat, in the PNC at Algeria, in his speech before the General Assembly of the United Nations at Geneva, in his press conference that so much hailed by some quarters, he made it clear that the two ultimate goals of his organization is the establishment of a Palestinian state in East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. And second, the right of return of 1.5 million Palestinian refugees to Israel within the Green Line. The combination of the two means, in simple terms, to annihilate, to destroy Israel. I believe it was Abba Ibn that once said that Israel has never considered our national suicide as an international obligation. Or I'll put it differently. Abba Ibn knows to put it in a better way. Israel that will agree to negotiate with the PLO says, for all practical purposes, that she accepts 30 or 60 or 80% of their demand, which we oppose, which will not do. At the same time, I believe it will be inconceivable to us that in the peace process that will bring peace on our eastern border, there will be no participation of 1.5 million Palestinians, that their fate, their future will be decided in this negotiations. They should be partners for the peace process. Therefore, the peace initiative of Israel is directed first and foremost towards them as a partner to us, to move by two phases, from here to peace on our eastern border. In essence, what we say to the Palestinians, forget the true throwing stones, petrol bottles, other kind of violence. You'll make Israel to give in, to change. On one hand, our readiness for peace with you and through you with the outside Arab world. But at the same time, forget that Israel will give in to any form of violence. We learned the hard way. We learned the hard way. Whoever gives in to any form of violence, would it be war by the armed forces of the Arab countries, terror or typical terror activities by the Palestinians from Lebanon, or the violence by the Palestinian civilians in the territories, will just invite more violence, more terror, increasing the danger of war. I believe that now Israel has got an overall policy that stands on 2 feet. A political one, the peace initiative. The military security one. Our responsibility to maintain law and order, to overcome violence, to the use of force within the limits of our laws. The problem today is, can we find a partner among the Palestinians in the territories that will accept the outline of our initiative, which is first to accept the principle of moving by 2 phases. Phase number 1, interim arrangement for transitional period. To stress that we are not looking to it as the permanent solution, but a transitional period in which we offer to the Palestinians something that no one in the past that was in power, would it be Egypt in the Gaza Strip or Jordan in the West Bank, self-rule, to run their own affairs by self-governing authority, with the exception of defense, foreign policy, and maintaining the Israeli citizens that reside in the territory. Otherwise, agriculture, commerce, industry, education, health, municipal affairs will be run by them. This interim arrangement will be interlocked by timetable to the permanent solution that has to be reached by negotiation, that will be conducted by Israel, the Palestinian representation, Jordan, as equal. And every side can bring whatever position, whatever suggestion, whatever issue that he would like to do. The need to move by steps, by phases, was proved to be essential to achieve peace with Egypt. It's even more vital when it comes to the conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis, which is going deeper and longer than with our neighboring Arab countries. The whole idea of having the interim arrangement is to let the Palestinians run their own affairs, to try to find under different realities a possibility of better understanding, reducing the animosity that has been accumulated, creating more confidence that we can work together towards peace. This is the idea. I have had the opportunity, after the decision of the cabinet, to meet with 15 leaders of the West Bankers, with 14 of the Gazians. I wouldn't mention names. They represented all segments of the population, pro-PLO, pro-Islamic fundamentalistic group. You name the political nuances, they were represented there. I told them in simple terms, for you, it is a unique opportunity. Don't repeat the mistakes that your leaders have made since the 40s, from the period of the leadership of Hajj Amin al-Husseini, the Mufti of Jerusalem, Ahmad Shukeri, now Mr. Arafat, that your policy was either everything or nothing, and you have remained with nothing. Learn from us. When we in 1917 had the Balfour Declaration, we said, okay, we'll use it. When in 1947 the partition plan came, Jerusalem was not included in the state of Israel, we said yes. It took the PLO 40 years to accept the partition resolution, Resolution 181. I feel that there are many among the Palestinians in the territory that on one hand they lead the struggle, but on the other hand, they know the amount of suffering that the violence brings upon themselves. They would like this to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but they are afraid. They are afraid, as one of them said to me last week, in front of other 13 Palestinians. He said to me, do you want us to emerge alone? You know, we will be finished. And he did this movement. The problem is how to bring about a situation that the Palestinians in the territory will decide to accept in principle the outline of our initiative and to participate in free political, regional, democratic elections, to choose by themselves, from themselves, a representation that will negotiate with us the interim agreement, that will be the self-governing authority, that will be the central Palestinian element to negotiate the permanent peace. It's not going to be easy. It's not that by sheer coincidence that in the last 2 months we see increase of terror within the Palestinians by the Palestinians. We see more attempts to kill Palestinians by Palestinians in the territory, so-called accused of having contact with the Israelis. They would like to maintain a regime of terror that no one would dare to raise his voice. The terror is not spread by Israelis. Somebody brought here the issue of free democratic elections. One of the West Bankers asked me the same question. And my answer to him was simple. You remember the 1976 elections for the head of local governments and mayorship? Weren't they free democratic elections? And if there were attempts of intimidation, it was done by terror organizations, terror groups, not by Israel. And you know what happened? One of the Palestinians, who is a mayor, came up in front of all the other 14 and said, the elections were free and democratic. He wouldn't dare to say it publicly, therefore I would not mention his name. But he dared to do it in front of the others. And he knew that some of them have close affiliation with the PLO of Tunisia. I believe here we have to work in three directions simultaneously. The first one, to continue to talk, to convince the Palestinians in the territories that we mean business. We would like to see a beginning of a political process based on the initiative, the way that the government Israel decided. Second, and it might sound to you not nice, we have to make clear to the Palestinians that through the continuation of violence, they'll not bring any change in Israel's position. The message must be that violence doesn't pay, doesn't lead whenever there is an offer to sit around the negotiation table and to solve it by talking, by peaceful means. And the third direction, to cooperate, especially with the United States, that to the best of my understanding, support the initiative, would like to assist Israel in moving ahead with this peace initiative to prevent the illusion that the PLO and Mr. Arafat tries to send back to the Palestinians in the territories, if I may quote him what he said 6 days ago. We are quarter of an hour before the total victory. He creates the illusion that once he is received by a king or a president of a European country, it's a practical political achievement. And we have to prove to him that it has no meaning. The only way to solve it is by sitting around the negotiation table and pursuing the pattern of the peace initiative of Israel. I believe it will be advisable to Israelis and Americans not to focus now what should be the major components of the permanent solution. If we try now to talk about borders, where should be delineated on the map, or what should be the permanent solution of the Palestinian problem, at this stage, it will be a mistake. It will not assist to move, because the only movement that it is feasible is at the present, to the first phase, when every side will keep all its options open. If we'll try now to focus on the permanent solution, it will lead to a stalemate or explosion, because we know that the gap between the position of Israel and the Arab countries and the Palestinians is wide and deep. To solve it now, or to tackle it now, will lead nowhere. We need a transition period as a measure of confidence building, reducing animosity, creating the hope of coexistence. Therefore, I didn't like what from time to time I hear either from Israelis or Americans. Whoever is interested to give a chance to the political process to start, and this is the problem, how to start with it, not how to end it now. How to start. Let's leave the questions that in accordance to our initiative should be tackled later on and focus now on what can be achieved now. This is I believe that if Israel and the United States will agree to work in coordination along these three lines, the peace, the blocking of the violence, and working on the international scene to deliver a clear-cut message to the Arab world and the Palestinians that they will achieve nothing, but they have to go to the negotiation table with the Israelis, there is a good chance. There is a good chance that in few weeks or few months we'll see a beginning of rethinking among the Arabs, among the Palestinians. I believe we all should try our best to move along the peace initiative, not to raise the issues that can be postponed, to deal with the issues that can open and clear the road to start the political process. This is the problem today. I am sure that the decision of Israel is a very major decision, and I'm sure that we all mobilize all our efforts to make this initiative the chance that it deserves. We expect and hope that you all mobilize your own force in support of the peace initiative of Israel. Thank you very much.
There's a special quality about the Tuesday luncheon session. It's almost like the Ne'ilah service, at which the special part of what we're doing comes to an end and we prepare ourselves to return to our normal lives, our normal routines, our daily pursuits. And it's a time when we look for a special message that we can take home with us, together with the many other messages, impressions, and serious matters that we will want to consider and will want to discuss in our communities. We're fortunate to have with us one of the keenest minds I know, a man to send us home with a final message, one dealing with the vital question of Israel's image in America. Our speaker Alan Dershowitz combines legal scholarship with a passion for justice to the point where he has been described as one of the most distinguished defenders of individual rights in our country. He is outspoken and challenging on any platform, whether in the courtroom, on national television, or in his syndicated column. He has proudly maintained his Jewish tradition and Jewish consciousness from his birthplace in the Williamsburg section of New York through Yeshiva University High School, Brooklyn College, and Yale Law School. After clerking for the Chief Judge of the Circuit, David Bazelon, and Supreme Court Justice Arthur Goldberg, Alan Dershowitz was appointed to the Harvard Law School faculty at the age of 25 and became a full professor at age 28, the youngest in the history of Harvard Law School, where he still teaches today. In 1983, he received the William O. Douglas First Amendment Award for his, and I quote, compassionate, eloquent leadership and persistent advocacy in the struggle for civil and human rights, end of quotation. In 1988, he served as a visiting professor of law at Hebrew University in Jerusalem and lectured there on civil liberties during times of crisis. He is working on a forthcoming book entitled Chutzpah, Reflection of a Proud and Assertive Jewish American. With his formidable intellect, his rapier wit, and his razor tongue, we can just be grateful that he is on our side. Today, he speaks to us on Israel's image in America, the public's role. Please join me in welcoming Professor Alan Dershowitz.
Thank you so much. Thank you all very much. It's really a privilege and a pleasure to speak in front of an organization that has been a paradigm of American democracy. I come from a very large family, so I'm used to trying to speak about people when they eat. So I hope you will eat and listen at the same time. When I was listening to Minister Rabin's remarks this morning and Mr. Reich's remarks, there was some reference toward the end about the future plight of Soviet Jewry, and I was put in mind of my last visit to the Soviet Union when I met with Ida Nudel, who was then about to go and serve a term in the Soviet Gulag. You'll recall that she spent months and months as the only woman prisoner, sleeping with a knife under her pillow to protect herself from the ravages of other Soviet prisoners. And the day before she was going to go to prison, I met her in front of St. Basil's, and I expected to see a forlorn and desperate woman. And when she saw me, she threw her arms around me and said, "Professor Dershowitz, tell me a joke that Jews tell in America, and I'll tell you a joke that Jews tell in the Soviet Union." She said, "The jokes we tell explain and speak volumes about our condition." I said, "Well, you at least have the advantage. You know your joke. Go first so I can think about my story." And she started with her story about the time that for the first time in years, fresh oranges were made available from the Ukraine in the Soviet Union. And the chief said, "Everybody come to the airport. There'll be a plane load of oranges for anybody who wants them." And everybody went to the airport, and it was late at night, and it was freezing, and they waited all night. And in the morning, the commissar announced there was a terrible mistake. It was not a plane load. It was only a truckload. All the Jews would have to go home. There were not enough oranges for the Jews. The Jews grumbled, everybody else cheered, and the Jews were sent home. The next morning, they all went to the truck station, and sure enough, the same thing happened. All night they waited, and they said, no, it wasn't a truckload, it was only a carload, and only members of the Communist Party could get oranges. Everybody else would have to go home, grumbling. Members of the Communist Party stayed, and the next day they said it was a terrible mistake. It was only a box load. Only members of the Central Committee could get the oranges. They waited all night, and the next day they said it was even a worse mistake. There were no oranges at all. one member of the Central Committee turned to the other and said, "See, the Jews get all the breaks. They were sent home first." And he just said, unless you understand that situation in the Soviet Union, you will never understand why we desperately want to emigrate to Israel. Now she said, "It's your turn." I said, "Okay, let me tell you the story about Mr. Schwartz. He got very sick, God forbid, in Boston, was taken to the fanciest hospital, Mass General Hospital, the fanciest pavilion, the Phillips Pavilion, presidents, actors, everybody, they take real good care of you. Mr. Schwartz stayed there 2 days, insisted on being shifted to Beth Israel Hospital, the little Jewish hospital down the road. The young intern, who wished he was an intern at Mass General Hospital, said, "Mr. Schwartz, I see the medical care in Mass General is not what it's cracked up to be." Mr. Schwartz says, No, medical care was wonderful, I can't complain. He said, "It must be the nurse." "No, nurse is fantastic, I can't complain." "It must be the food, all that watercress." No, the food was sensational, I can't complain." "Technical stuff, X-ray." No, X-ray's great, I can't complain. He said, "Then why did you switch to our hospital?" He says, "Here, I can complain." And I said, that is the essence of the role of the Jew in America, with all the great things we have given this country and have received from it. We can complain. And I'm here today, gently but firmly, to complain. To complain about American policy toward Israel, American attitudes toward Israel, academic attitudes toward Israel, media attitudes toward Israel, and even Jewish attitudes toward Israel. In the spirit of constructive friendship, I want to gently complain about the tone of the Secretary of State's remarks yesterday, about his apparent lack of historical and moral perspective on the Middle East, his implicit suggestion, and it was only implicit, that there is some moral equivalence in the Israeli and the Arab position, a moral equivalence that calls for even-handedness. Nothing could be further from the truth. One cannot, if one is an honest man or woman, compare the continuingly genocidal statements and efforts of terrorism and warfare, even including new chemical and biological warfare. One cannot compare that with the self-defense efforts undertaken by Israel, even if they are sometimes overreactive. There is no moral comparison. It is very easy, and we in America should know it better than anyone else, it is very easy to provoke a democracy into overreaction. We don't have to remember back so many years to Kent State when unarmed young boys and girls protesting a policy of our country were gunned down by members of the National Guard. We don't have to remember too far back to the disgraceful episode of the United States detaining 110,000 citizens of Japanese American background when we perceived a distant threat from beyond our borders. We know how easy it is to provoke a democracy into overreaction, and as Justice Jackson said, in evaluating our response to the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, when the generals decided to detain those Japanese Americans, it was merely an incident, an expedient, but when the United States Supreme Court affirmed that detention, it became a disaster. One does not judge a democracy by the way its soldiers immediately react, young men and women under tremendous provocation. One judges a democracy by the way its courts react in the dispassionate cool of judicial chambers. And the Israeli Supreme Court and other courts have reacted magnificently. For the first time in Arab history, there is an independent judiciary willing to listen to grievances of Arabs. That judiciary is called the Israeli Supreme Court. For years, the Palestinians did not know how to deal with the Israeli Supreme Court. They had never seen a judiciary which responded by sometimes being critical of a government. I recall so vividly when the Israeli government made the mistake of building a religious settlement at Eilan Moreh, and many of us protested that. I recall it vividly because I had never formally and publicly protested an Israeli action before, and then I did that, and for the first time my name appeared on the front page of the New York Times. 56 prominent intellectuals criticized Israel. I had criticized every other country on the face of the earth, and it had always appeared behind the weather report in Providence, Rhode Island, on page 68. But when a Jew criticizes Israel, his or her Jewishness serves as a megaphone for that criticism. And I remember then reading 3 or 4 months later how the Israeli Supreme Court, internally, domestically, without any need for prodding from outside, had ruled that the Israeli action was ultra-virus, unconstitutional, under their unwritten but very effective Constitution. There is no moral equivalent. There is no moral equivalent because it is a reality, and we must understand that reality, that there is not a single Arab leader, and I use the word loosely because by leader I mean dictator. There have been no Arab democratically elected leaders. But no Arab dictator could today survive if he, and I mean he, had the military capacity to defeat Israel and forbore from acting on that military capacity. No Arab dictator could survive an ability to military defeat Israel without, in fact, engaging in military actions. I remember being in Egypt a couple of years ago, in fact, and I was sitting with a Jewish couple for the Passover Seder, and we were talking about how terrible it was for Jews during the 48 and 67 and Lebanese and War of Attrition. And I said, but you skipped the Yom Kippur War. And the Jewish couple said to me, yeah, but the Egyptians won that war. We had no problem during that period of time. It demonstrates the sense of what victory means, used to mean to Egypt, now still means to many Arab leaders. There was a decisive defeat in that war. But because Egypt was able to mount a campaign, even though a brief campaign, the Egyptian leadership, even under so noble a leader as Sadat, had to take that action, had to engage in military activities. And when one thinks of what that means in the current age of nuclear weaponry, of gas warfare, of germ warfare, of Scud missiles in the hands of enemies sworn to the destruction of Israel, one must understand that there is no moral equivalency. That when Israel had the capacity to decisively defeat Arab armies, it took the minimal steps necessary to secure its own defensive needs and did not engage in the willful destruction of civilian populations. I get very angry, and I think I have a right to complain as a student of human rights when I read the recent State Department report on Israel, which required the United States to issue the following retraction after the media covered the State Department report on Israel. This is a little headline in the Boston Globe. U.S. says Israel not worst offender. And a headline in the New York Times letter to the editor's page, Israel isn't the worst human rights offender. Do you know what that tells students and other citizens when we have to say that Israel is not the worst human rights offender? Israel doesn't even belong in the same volume as the human rights offenders, the 150 worst human rights offenders. The idea of even comparing Israeli overreaction in the West Bank, and I mean that word when I say it because I think Israel has been provoked into overreaction, but in comparing overreaction to stone throwing and Molotov cocktail throwing and recently the use of automatic weapons, when one compares that to the use of poison gas by Iraq against the Kurdish minority, or the use of bullets and guns to kill thousands of people by Syria, or the use of other weapons of civilian genocide when used by the Iranians, the idea that we would even include Israel as a substantial violator of human rights and allow people to believe that Israel may not be the worst violator or one of the worst violators, but is up there with the other violators, is an abomination to human rights. It makes a mockery of the concept of human rights. We must never forget that if these modest first steps toward elections in the West Bank and in the Gaza are carried forward, it will be the first time in Arab history that free elections have been held in this part of the world. I am not in favor of the occupation as a human rights activist, but I have to tell you, there has never been a freer press in any part of the Arab world than the all too unfree press that today exists in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem. For the first time in Arab history, there has been a relatively independent press, too censored by my standards, too censored by your standards, and most importantly, too censored by Israeli standards. Israel does not comply with its own high standards of human rights in the West Bank. But if one compares the Israeli treatment in the West Bank with any other international standard, historical or contemporary, Israel shines by comparison. That is not high praise, to shine by comparison with current and past international human rights standards in occupied territories, but one has to understand that reality in making comparative contextual criticisms, and that's what's lacking in the world today. That's why my students today firmly believe that Israel, along with South Africa, are the worst human rights violators in the world. They are reading that, they are hearing that, their teachers are teaching them that, and we are not answering. We are not providing truth as an antidote to falsehood. We are not doing a good enough job, not in public relations or media, but in truth, in simply setting out the facts, in providing our students, our supporters, our congressmen, our senators, a realistic assessment of the hard, cruel world out there, a cruel world which Israel would hope to be exempt from, but tragically has to defend itself and has to become part of. I am here to complain about those Jews who have the chutzpah to stand in front of the United Nations to complain to the United Nations about Israel. Do you know what that means? When Ed Asner, representing people like Woody Allen and other naive critics of Israel who have no sense of the difficulties and the realities, let them stand and protest in front of the Israeli embassy. Let them go to Israel and exercise their freedom of speech and freedom of press there, but let them not give aid to the enemies. Let them not become part of an effort to delegitimate Israel in the international community by standing in front of the United Nations. The United Nations, where more racist, anti-Semitic, and anti-Zionist propaganda has emanated from than any other single building. I'm here to complain about those Jews with newfound Jewish identities, those Jews who have never before identified themselves as Jews, those Jews who, if you would go to and ask to give money to the CJP or the UJA or Israel or any other Jewish organization, would say, and this is a real experience that I'm talking about with some of my colleagues, oh, I'm not Jewish. My family has Jewish background, but don't have the audacity to ask me for a Jewish contribution. Suddenly they're Jewish when it comes to signing an ad that says, we, Jewish critics of Israel, who are embarrassed with our friends about what those people are doing, are suddenly identifying ourselves as rejuvenated, newly discovered Jews in order to disassociate ourselves. I'm here to complain about American Jews, devoted, dedicated American Jews who are feared and frightened into silence by false charges of dual loyalty, who would never, never be frightened if they belong to another group or another background, but who feel scared by what my grandmother used to feel scared of, the kind of shashtil, shunda from the goyim attitude. Let us never forget that we are America. We have given more to this country than we have taken back. We are as first-class citizens as any other group. The United States is in its second century. I think it's fair to call the second of this century the Jewish century in America. We have made our contribution in the last 100 years. We, along with other immigrant groups, we, along with Italian Americans and Asian Americans and Irish Americans and black Americans liberated from slavery, this second century of America, with the help of Jewish Americans, has been the great century of America. Recall what we were back in the 19th century. We were Australia. We were, with all due respect to our northern neighbor, Canada. We were New Zealand. We were a former British colony that had not established ourselves in the history of the world. We have established ourselves in the second century, and with no small debt to immigrants who've come to this country and no small debt to Jewish immigrants who have come to this country. Let no one tell us that we are guests in someone else's country. We are the hosts. We are the Americans. We have no dual loyalty. As Americans, we have every right and every responsibility to tell the congressmen and senators that it is in the interest of America to support Israel. Nobody tells us out of a heavenly word what is in the best interest of America, and then we try to compromise that for our own interest. What is in the best interest of America is what the holy, free, participatory democracy that we are part of tells us is best for America. And that's why your work is so important. Not to try to compromise away, not to try to chisel away a little bit of pro-Israeli attitude from what is really good for America, but to persuade our senators and our congressmen and our presidents of the truth, and that is, it is good for America to support Israel in the way that it has been supporting Israel, and even more. That's the American way. I'm here to complain about those American Jews who emphasize more that which divides us from each other rather than that which unites us. There are some things that we disagree about. Not everybody in this room agrees, and not every Jew in America agrees. There are some issues that divide us, but the issues that unite us are so much more profound than the issues that divide us. I'm reminded of the story of the conservative rabbi who was given a new congregation in the suburbs. For the first time he goes and performs the event on a Friday night, and when it comes to the Shema Yisrael, half the congregation stands up, half the congregation sits down, the half that stands up yells at the half that sits down, the half that sits down yells at the half that stands up. There's no way of conducting the service. The rabbi finally says, look, at the end of the service we'll go to the old Rebbe in town and we'll find out what was the tradition of the congregation. And they go to the old Rebbe, he's sipping his tea, it's after Shabbos, and they say, the stand-up group says, is it not the tradition that we stand up? And the Rebbe shakes his head and says, no, that is not the tradition. Then the sit-down group says, then it must be the tradition, Rebbe, that we sit down. And the Rebbe says, no, that is not the tradition. And the new conservative rabbi says, but this is terrible. Half of them stand up, half of them sit down. I can't even hear myself think. And the old rabbi says, yes, my son, that is the tradition. But I remember once telling that story. In a congregation, and my mother was sitting in the back, and my mother yelled out, but at least they all say the Shema Yisrael. And that, too, is the tradition. We all have our own version of what the Shema Yisrael is. We do have our differences over Israel, but we have our similarities. And I want to end by suggesting what I think the consensus is in this country, and why the Secretary, with all due respect, may have been wrong in characterizing some of the views as the views of Israel or the views of the American Jewish community. I think we have consensus in this country over the following propositions. Israel's continued survival is essential both to the United States and to American Jewry. Now, Noam Chomsky may not agree with that, but he does not speak for this community. I think it is essential that, and it's a part of the consensus, that Israel's survival depends on it remaining militarily superior to the combined Arab and Islamic armed forces. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. You have to be crazy not to understand that if there ever came a time when Israel was militarily inferior or even equal to, even-handed with the combined Arab armies, that would guarantee an attempt, at least, to destroy Israel. As I mentioned, no Arab leader would remain in power if he did not take advantage of that superiority. Number 3, Israel should not permanently annex Arab population centers for exclusively religious or expansionist reasons. I don't think there's much dispute about that. I don't think there's much dispute about the issue of why Israel is currently holding on to territories. The vast majority of Israelis and Americans, according to every public opinion poll, view the territories in the context of Israel's security against the background of Arab aggression and terrorism. Mr. Secretary, with all due respect, Israel has no unrealistic vision of a greater Israel except the very realistic need to bargain from hard and firm positions and to bargain down. No lawyer ever gives away his entire case, his entire bargaining position prior to sitting down for settlement talks, Mr. Secretary. I also think there is vast consensus, though there might be some disagreement among some elements of the left, but I think there is vast consensus on the following proposition. Israel should not do what no other nation in history has ever done, namely, return land captured in a defensive war with the full expectation that that land will be used against it militarily. You have to be a fool. You have to be a fool to return a battleship to your enemy so that your enemy will have a better launching pad for attacks on you. I think there is consensus on the proposition that Israel, and this was a statement made by the defense minister not an hour ago, that Israel should grant all political and civil rights to those in occupied territories that are consistent with Israel's security. Nobody wants to close schools. Nobody wants to not hold elections. Nobody wants to censor newspapers. Everybody would like to see the widest civil and political rights consistent with Israel's security, but Israel's security cannot be determined unilaterally. And there has to be some bargaining, and there has to be some negotiation. Israel should take reasonable risks for peace, but Israel should not take unreasonable risks for peace. How to fill in those blanks requires the utmost of statesmanship, a crystal ball, an ability to foresee the future that none of us who has not made the commitment to put our bodies and our children's bodies on the line in Israel should dictate to Israel about. And finally, if Israel can be assured realistically of peace, the Israelis, the American Jews, have no real concerns in the form of government ultimately adopted by the Palestinians. The concern is only a security concern. Obviously, we would prefer a democracy. It's not so clear the Palestinians would. A poll conducted last year by professors at Birzeit University, one of the universities closed, a Palestinian university, a Palestinian professor, conducted a poll to see what kind of a state most Palestinians on the West Bank and Gaza preferred. And the overwhelming majority preferred either an Islamic fundamentalist state or a state modeled on Eastern European socialist democracies. Only a minority preferred a Western-style democracy. But once Israel is assured peace, that is not its concern. So when one focuses on these 8 basic points of consensus, I think we are a united community and not a divided community. We have disagreements. about levels of risk, about who goes first, about initiatives, about details. And we all have the right to criticize our government in the United States, to criticize the Israeli government, but that criticism must be contextual. It must be comparative. It must be constructive. It must be done without any effort to delegitimate. It must not lend support to the enemies of Israel. It must, if possible, be done internally first. But I can't tell a fellow Jew or a fellow supporter of Israel that there is never a time for public criticism. I urge you, however, to think very carefully about the megaphone that your Jewishness and your activism on behalf of Israel takes and makes into criticisms. But most important, we are fighting a losing campaign today for the future. I teach the future senators, congressmen, and presidents of the United States, people who come into my classes, and I speak not for myself alone, but for the other professors who are here, we teach the future leaders. And I think if you speak to any of us and speak to the students from Michigan and others who I've spoken to today, you will find that in 20 years, when this class is in Congress, and when your children, hopefully, are lobbying these people in Congress, the dynamics will be different unless we change them now, unless we can present factually and adequately and accurately the true picture of the Middle East, the true picture of what is going on. So this is a campaign for truth, not for public relations. This is a campaign for honesty, not for propaganda. And finally, having made all my complaints, I'm here to praise. I'm here to praise American Jews like you, who in the highest tradition of our pluralistic democracy play a constructive role in formulating and implementing American policy. Let no one ever shy away from the claim that Jews have power, that Jews have influence. We have learned the terrible lesson of history that unless we have influence and power disproportionate to our small numbers, immoral results will occur. We need power. And we must continue to use our power, power which we earned, power which no one gave us on a silver platter, power which we worked hard for. Use that power in the interests of justice. That's my message to you this afternoon. I congratulate you all for the great work you're doing for two democracies, for America and for Israel. Thank you.
As I said, I'm glad you're on our side. That was wonderful. That was absolutely wonderful.
Concludes this portion of a conference focusing on relations between the U.S. and Israel. If you would like more information about the issues discussed, you may write the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, 500 North Capitol Street Northwest, Washington, D.C., 20001. Stay with us now for our coverage of the annual meeting of the International Automotive Congress.